so that we can have it for folks who can't join in person today. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Erica Ganayak, one of our solution architects on the Solution Delivery Enablement team. Welcome to our Circles of Success kickoff for 2025. If you've attended any of our previous Liferay boot camps or webinars, you might recognize me. Today, I'll be taking you on a journey of how you can integrate Liferay workflows into your daily operations, or as I like to call it, taking the work out of workflows. You are not seeing double. There were actually 2 sessions today around the exact same topic. So if you were here for the morning session, it is going to be the same content, but you are free and welcome to stay for the rest of the session and ask any questions that you might have. But if you couldn't attend the morning session, you didn't miss out. Okay, well, here's a quick breakdown of what I'm hoping to cover today. We're really going to do a high-level overview today of what Liferay workflows are. We'll cover some key benefits of using them, some of the more common use cases, and then I'm going to switch over to a live demo to show you what the out-of-the-box workflow looks like and how you can customize it to build your own workflows. We'll take a quick look at the workflow metrics and how you can define SLAs. Then we'll look ahead to future session topics that we can use to really dig a lot deeper than today's session and cover a whole lot more. But since you're here, I'm going to assume that we have all been this guy at some point in our lives. This is what I look like whenever I encounter a really painful manual process or workflow. But first, let's take a step back. Before we get too far, we probably should start by defining what is a workflow. You could think of it like a series of manual steps or tasks in a particular sequence that are performed repetitively over time. We refer to the sequence of steps or tasks as a process workflow. If you've ever purchased a car, you've probably wondered why this process can feel like it takes a million years. And that's because there are so many steps and people that your application needs to go through before it can be approved and you can drive that car off the lot. Automating painstaking manual processes is essential to enabling business users to take better control of their daily productivity and to make things easier and better for users. Okay, next up, how does this relate to Liferay? Liferay provides an out-of-the-box workflow engine that can help you to define any number of business or organizational processes as workflows. You can deploy them and manage them all through the Liferay portal UI. Liferay provides a convenient drag-and-drop user interface for making workflow design easy to configure and to publish new workflows. If you need to provide feedback to content creators to improve on a recent article they've submitted for publication, maybe there's a Q&A or an audit team that needs to double check the requirements and ensure any legal documents are properly signed. Liferay Workflow is here to help. In many organizations today, there are multiple departments that have a vested interest in the content that's part of their web solutions, particularly when you have public-facing websites. There are business processes. You have reviewers, approvers, required data that all need to be enforced. This means that there are internal stakeholders that need to collaborate and provide different levels of approvals before the updates can go live. One of the most efficient ways to enforce organizational policies is by configuring an approval workflow. Liferay ships with a single approver workflow, which basically means you have a second set of eyes on your work. The reviewer has the ability to approve and publish the change, or to reject it and require an update and resubmission. And more importantly, Liferay provides the ability to define your own custom workflows using a visual designer. The visual workflow designer can be used to build more complex flows in order to satisfy any governance requirements. Workflows can then be associated with different asset types, meaning you don't have to use the same approval process for everything. For example, you may require multiple people or departments to approve a new product being added to the site, but just a single approval to publish a blog post. Workflow provides the ability to automate these repetitive tasks like approvals, notifications, and content routing to save time. These automated steps and rules reduce the risk of human error from those pesky manual processes. You can assign specific tasks and approvals to designated users, providing transparency throughout the whole process, which helps clearly define the roles and the responsibilities of those users. You can automate notifications to keep stakeholders informed about progress and status, and you can define structured review and feedback loops throughout the process. You can design fully customizable and flexible workflows based on your specific needs or requirements. You can work seamlessly with other third-party systems as well as Liferay features, including the bulk of Liferay's API. This list is just a fraction of the possible ways that workflow can help a business optimize their daily operations. You can have routing content for approval, an onboarding process for new applicants, auto approvals, giving feedback to creators. Really, with the flexibility of the visual workflow designer, the sky is really the limit. As a manager, perhaps you need clearer visibility into where in the workflow process things are currently at, or if someone has an excessive amount of workload that can be balanced with another resource. Liferay also allows you to define workflow SLAs, which can be used to measure the overall performance of a workflow. You can track things such as total time to resolution, time to complete a specific workflow task, etc., to help identify and optimize any bottlenecks that are slowing down your process. All right, now I am going to switch gears and move over to a live demo. We'll be doing some work in our Clarity Vision Solutions website, which if you've followed any of our previous boot camps or courses will be familiar to you. If not, Clarity is an eyewear manufacturer that recently increased their digital footprint with a public website that they can use as the foundation for their digital business. So let me go ahead and if I can share my other screen. 1 second. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully you are seeing my Liferay portal. I have 2 windows open today, and that's because I want to be able to show you the workflow at the same time that we're actually making some changes. So it's a lot easier to visualize some of this stuff when you can see the workflow in front of you. All right. So to start with, I'd like to show you the out-of-box Liferay workflow. If you go to the Applications menu in Workflow, you'll see a link called Process Builder. The first tab here is a list of all of the workflows that you have available in the system. In this case, I'm going to choose the single approver because that's the out-of-the-box workflow. And it's a pretty simple workflow overall, so I think it'll make things a little easier to kind of walk through and talk about. So it's pretty simple. It only has 2 task nodes. And you'll notice that there are quite a few node types here on the left that you can choose from. Each of them has their individual purpose. So the start node is always going to be needed. This will begin the workflow. The end node will also be required. And this is what tells Liferay that the workflow is concluded. So everything in between could be utilized by any of the other node types here. So the condition node, that's the one with the little diamond in it. This executes conditional logic. So it'll check some type of condition, and depending on the result, send it to the appropriate transition. We don't have one in the single approver workflow, but I do have some examples for you a little bit later on. The task node, like this review and update, really represents where all of the work is done. You can assign users to review and approve items, for example. So this review node here, let me go down and show you a couple of things about it. The first thing you can do is assign people to this task. And the out-of-box workflow assigns just a ton of different roles to this task. So really any administrators, content reviewers, owners really are part of the assignment. So they could potentially pick up this task for review. Then you have notifications, and these are going to be of two different types. You can send email notifications or user notifications. The user notifications will appear within Liferay as a Liferay notification within the Liferay portal UI. You can define here what you would like the message to say. Currently, the default one is using free marker. You also have the option to use text or velocity templates. And you'll notice that there are some variables that are also used that are part of the workflow context. And we do have documentation on Liferay Learn that walks you through some of these variables. So that would probably be a good place to start if you're wanting to know what types of variables are available. So this one is going to send this task is going to send a message on assignment. So that means when this review task is assigned, and then it's going to assign or send these notifications to the recipients. And again, there's a lot of flexibility here in what you can send or who you can send these to. You can use specific users. Role-based is pretty common because then you can basically assign a group of people to a specific role. So if someone is on vacation or out of town, can't pick up an item, then you have a group of people that could be responsible for that and can pick up anything that someone might not have time for. You can also do scripted recipients. I do want to caveat that with if you're on Liferay SaaS in the cloud environment, then scripting is not available to you. So that option would not be available. There would be potentially some others that you could use in that regard, like Liferay object actions or sometimes client extensions. But actual Groovy scripting and Java scripting within the workflow would be disabled for a Liferay SaaS environment. It is enabled for Liferay self-hosted and for Liferay PAD. There is another notification here for this review node, and this is going to go to the asset creator. So it's going to tell them on exit of this task that their submission was reviewed. So you'll have two notifications associated with this. You'll notice there are, if I get out of notifications, there are a couple of other things here that are listed. We have actions and timers. So actions are a very adaptable they're a very adaptable attribute, and we don't have any on the review node, but in the single approver, we do have some actions within the update. So the way that this workflow will work is that the start node will trigger the workflow. So let's say you have a blog entry that's been created. Then it will go to the review task for review. Whoever is reviewing this task will have two options. They'll be able to approve it or reject it. So those two transitions is what we're calling them. Those two transitions are what are going to be available to the user. If it is approved, then that's the end of the workflow. That asset will be approved for publication. If it is rejected, then that means it's going to go to this update task. And the user that submitted this asset for review will need to go back and make changes. And then they have the option then of resubmitting or withdrawing it later, but resubmitting back to the review process. So this loop can go on indefinitely until that asset is ready for publication or it's withdrawn from submission. So the update task actually has a couple of actions associated with it. So you can assign these on assignment of this node, on entry, or on exit. So in this case, we have two actions, and they're both executed on assignment. So the first action it updates the status of this workflow to denied, and then it sets the status to pending. So the priority here is pretty important because it represents which of these actions is going to be executed first. So actions with higher priorities will be executed first, and lower numbers are higher priority. So it'll switch the status from denied to pending. And you also have some other options here. You can use Groovy or Java, or if you have a client extension as well, that could be an option. So the last one, if I go back here, is the timer. So the timer is pretty useful if you have a need to ensure maybe a task doesn't go unattended for too long. So you can also specify a script here if you're not on Liferay SaaS. And you can specify, oh, sorry, wrong place. You can specify the type of action, notification, or reassignment. So you can maybe notify someone that, hey, this task has been sitting in the queue for way too long. Maybe set it to a duration of maybe 2 days. And if it's sitting in the review task for any longer, then a notification will be sent. And you can specify the Groovy, Java, or some type of client extension as well. Oh, I don't know why it keeps doing that, but click on it again. Here we go. Okay, so let me try this one more time. I swear it didn't do this during the first session. Okay. All right. So you can set the scale and you can set the duration and you can set what you want to happen. All right. Enough on timers. So the next thing that I wanted to kind of walk you through is, okay, we've seen this workflow, but now we want to see it in action. So let's try enabling it with a piece of asset. Let's do this with, let's try it with web content articles. So if you go to the configuration screen, you have a list of assets and Liferay objects here in this list. So it's fairly comprehensive. And if I go to the end, you'll see that there's a web content article. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the single approver workflow on the web content article. Right. And luckily, I have a user here that is a content creator. So I want to keep the single approver workflow open on the left. Let's see if I can make this happen for you guys. Okay. And then I logged in as Christian Carter here on the right. So I want to create a new web content article. And I'm going to stick it under this folder called articles. Click on new. And then you can select the type of the asset. Okay. Now this is a little hard to enter information on such a tiny screen. So what I'm going to do is just expand it out for a second. I'm going to set the headline. I'm going to set some content. Let's make the headline the title. And then let's select an image from my list of images here. All right. So we have a headline, an image, and some content. To see the future clearly, this is important to an eyewear manufacturer. So you'll notice that up here, you have two options. You can save as draft or you can submit for workflow. Now that the workflow has been enabled, you'll see that option. So let's go ahead and click on that. And that should bring us into the single approver workflow. So this first review task, if we look at the assignments, we have a bunch of different roles that are assigned to it. And one of those is our administrative role. So what I want to do now is to log in as the administrator on this side. And I'll see that there's a notification here right away by my user icon. If I click on the notifications, then I can see that Christian Carter sent me a web content article for review in the workflow about a minute ago. So, yep, this is definitely the article. I can see the activities here, any comments that were associated with it, or none so far. And then we have the ability to assign it to myself or assign to someone else. So if you'll recall, in the workflow, we assign things to a role, which is definitely a best practice as opposed to assigning to a particular user if you can help it. And if we go to the My Workflow task, which is another view of seeing the workflow task, you'll see two tabs in the workflow widget. You'll see Assign to Me and Assign to My Roles. So it will show up in the Assign to My Roles section in addition to your notifications. And you can click on Assign to Me, so that's important. Then it'll show up in your Assign to Me table. So here you can see we're in the review task, and now we have the options of approving it or rejecting it. So as you'll recall in the workflow, these were our two transitions, approve and reject. And looking at this article, I'm not sure I like the fact that there is a comma in the title. So I'm going to go ahead and reject this article. Commas in the title, please. Okay, then click on Done. Now that I've rejected it, it should go back to the asset creator. That's who it's been assigned to in the workflow. So let's log out and log back in as Christian Carter. Right. And we'll see that Christian has a notification now. Unfortunately, Christian's submission was rejected. Please modify and resubmit. Okay, so now I have an option. I can edit this through the preview window. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me change this article and remove these commas. Okay, and then everything else looked fine. So I'm just going to submit for workflow again, which is the equivalent of saving it. So we can see from the preview, this change has occurred, but we still need to perform this action of resubmitting. No more commas. And then click on Done. So now that it's been resubmitted, it should be going back to the review step. So let's go ahead and log out as Christian and log it back in as our administrator. This should go back into the administrator's bucket. All right, we do have a notification. And we see that he sent a web article for review. And now, no more commas. So it looks great. First thing you need to do is assign it to yourself since it was just assigned to your role. And then you can choose to approve it or reject it. Again, based on your single approver workflow. And let's go ahead and approve it now since we're happy with it. So now if we go to the content and data and we go to the web content articles, we now see that the See the Future Clearly article is set to approved state. If it was still in workflow, we would have seen it in this pending state. But since it's been approved, it is ready for use in production. Okay, let me see. Is there anything else? I wanted to mention if you are a technical Liferay developer, just one note here about workflows and staging and publications, if you use those tools at all. In the case of staging, the items cannot be placed into an approved state until it passes through the workflow. So staging and publications both do enforce the workflow. If you're in publications, Then during the publishing process, it's going to check and stop the publish if there's a workflow that's required that hasn't been completed yet. So there is governance around that, even if you're working in staging or within publications. So that is just a really quick peek at the out of the box one. And as you can see, there's a lot of changes that you probably want to make, right? You wouldn't want to assign it to 10,000 different roles, and you probably have more specific requirements when it comes to workflows. So I wanted to show you another way that you can use workflows by customizing it. So what I normally do is I take the workflow and I duplicate it, and then I make the changes that I need. So in this case, I've created a supplier onboarding application, and I'd like to send this application through a workflow. So we have a supplier onboarding application, which I've created with Liferay objects. Once that process begins, I want to send it to review. And first, it will go to a purchasing department. And the purchasing department has two options. It can reject it or it can send for audit. So those are our two transitions that are coming out of this first task node. So if it's rejected, then you're going to go through the same process of resubmitting it until it's ready. Then when it is ready, the purchasing department can send it for audit, and that will go to the audit department. So the next task will be to the audit department, and they'll have the option of sending it for final review or rejecting it, in which case it goes back to the purchasing department. If it's good, happy path, everything is fine, they'll send it to final review to the purchasing department again. And in reality, a supplier onboarding application probably has quite a bit of information in it, and it's probably going to take a bit of time to get through it. You could have supporting documentation that needs to be reviewed, make sure our signatures are there. So it's usually not a boom, 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 and you're done process. So it would go back to the purchasing department for a final review. And then potentially you might want to do some kind of a sync, maybe with another system. So in this case, possibly Salesforce. So you can set up an action here that could potentially perform some type of logic, either in Groovy or JavaScript, as long as you're not on SAS, and perform some actions that way to make sure that the environments are synced, the systems are synced. And then the onboarding is complete. So this is based on a Liferay object, and just want to show you that real quick. Underneath our control panel, we have a list of Liferay objects, but we want to look at the definition. And I've created a really quick supplier onboarding application object. It's very bare bones. I only have a few custom fields in it, but of course you probably have many more, probably related to the company and supporting documentation that needs to be submitted. So this is pretty small compared to what you would likely normally see. So what I want to do though is enable this workflow for my supplier onboarding application object. So if I go back to Process Builder and I go back to that configuration screen, then I have the list of assets here where we can assign workflow to. If I go to the second page, you'll see the supplier onboarding application is here. And by default, none of these have workflow defined. So if I click on Edit, and I'm going to assign the supplier onboarding workflow to it. Okay. So we do have a page that I created that shows the object underneath applications. And I've enabled this for guest users. So let me go ahead and log in. Actually, you know what? I want to keep the workflow open just so we have kind of a visual representation of the process that we're going through. Otherwise, it can get a little bit complicated. Okay, so let's keep that open on the left. So far, so good. And then on the right-hand side here, I want to log out and I want to submit this application, fill it out as a guest. Okay, I'm going to add a supplier onboarding application. Let's say I'm with Bold Eyewear. Erica at boldeyewear.com. Okay, and now let's submit it. Okay, it says our request is submitted successfully. That should kick off our supplier onboarding workflow. So let's log in as someone in our purchasing department. I've set up a couple of users for us that are associated with the purchasing and auditing department. Sally is a user that has the purchasing department role. And you can see that Sally has a notification now. And here we go. A supplier onboarding application has been sent to you for review in the workflow. Look at that. And this is indeed my application. I can review it. There's probably much more information likely inside this in the real life scenario, but I can assign this to myself. Remember, because it's going to the purchasing department. Sally is just one of probably many people. Okay, then Sally has the option of either rejecting it or sending it for audit. So let's go ahead and send for audit. And then we will become someone who's in the audit department. And we have a user called Clara who is in the audit department. So if we look at her notifications, oh, she's quite busy. She's got a lot of stuff going on. She has a supplier onboarding application for review from Sally. And you can see what the task name is here. This is in the audit application task, and she has the ability to reject it or send it for final review. So let's see if that's the case. First, assign to me. And then she can reject it or send for final review. So at this point, Clara would do all of her auditing tasks and make sure that everything looked good. And then she would either approve it or reject it. We'll go for happy path now. We'll send for final review, which means that in our workflow, this is going to go back to the purchasing department again. So let's go back and log in as Sally. Okay, now I can see Sally has a notification here. And now her message is, Clara has sent me a supplier onboarding application for review in the workflow. Take a look. Yep, this is the final review. So we know we're almost completed. Let me go ahead and assign it to myself. Now assign to Sally. And then she has the option of either updating Salesforce, which was that happy path route, or rejecting it again to go back, well, to herself basically. So remember, this is a demo. So I'm going to do the happy path. I'm going to go ahead and send it on its way, and it can complete and go through and finish out the workflow. So this is just one example of how you can utilize a custom workflow to your needs. And it's really, really easy to just drag and drop nodes onto the canvas and create links between nodes. So you can build out this visual representation of what your process would be. So let me see if there were any other, some technical notes. If you are a developer, I wanted to make sure I hit these. Their scripting is disabled by default as of DXP 2024 Q3 version. So in self-hosted and PaaS environments, you need to enable it in system settings and check the allow administrator to create and execute code in Liferay box. Otherwise, this step for adding logic, adding condition logic will not work. Another technical note, you'll notice, that at each step of the process, the workflow has certain data that's available to it. And I can show you that in one of our other examples here. So I've created another example called category specific approval. And the purpose of it is to take a look at an asset and use the condition node. This is some logic that's going to be executed. In this case, it's a Groovy script. And this little box is really difficult to read. And so what I normally do is I take the code and I copy and paste it into an editor of my choice. So that way you can see the code in its entirety because that little box is difficult. Um, so I can see that there are quite a few Liferay classes that are utilized here, the kernel classes, no less, and service classes. So in this realm, you would probably want to use local service utils because OSGI wouldn't be available to you. But you do have the workflow context. And the workflow context it's like a map with a string and serializable object in it. And you can utilize any of the variables that are part of this workflow context. Some variables are auto-injected into the workflow. These are handy to use in the notification templates or when you're looking at your condition logic. And you can inject other variables as well, but that's probably the subject of a deeper discussion and a future topic that I would be planning on. So you can learn more about the variables though within our Liferay Learn documentation. But just wanted to make you aware that there are options for variables available that you can utilize within your workflow. And then, see, so we are using Groovy, but you do also have the option to use Java, and you could create, in this instance, it's a condition node, you can create a condition evaluator class that would execute all of this code rather than Groovy if you're not a big fan of Groovy. But again, I can walk you all through that in a future session. Okay, I've got about, 5 minutes here? Okay. I did have one other workflow example that I wanted to show you, another case where fast tracking or auto approval might be useful. So the idea here is that you might have multiple layers of approval that an asset might need to go through. In this case, an article may need to go to, if your role is an editor, then it would need to go to a senior editor for review. If your role is a senior editor, then you might need to have it submitted to the corporate communications layer for review and approval. Or if your role is an administrator, then you are automatically approved. So you have godlike powers of the system. So that's just the way it is. But if you're a junior editor, you'll see that there are actually two levels of approvals. You have the senior editor review and approval and the corporate communications, but you can skip that and fast track it straight to corporate communications if you're a senior editor. So this condition logic can be written so that you can check the role of the user, and depending on what the transition out of this node is, editor, senior editor, administrator, or any other role, then you can perform some action on it. So that's just another example of how you can utilize scripting and conditional logic. So last thing I want to show you, and then I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions, is the workflow metrics. So let me go up here to workflow, and underneath process builder, you'll see a metrics option. So here is where you can define different SLAs for each of your workflows. I've only defined it for supplier onboarding, and I do have an SLA already defined here, but you can create any number. This SLA is measuring the total time it takes for the asset or the object to go through the workflow. It tracks the asset for its entire time, and you can pause it while it's in a specific step, like the update task, if there are changes being made. So the timer will start when the process begins, and then we can set the update task as the pause, and then we can stop when the process is completed. And then you can set the SLA duration. So if you know this process will take 3 days, then you can set this to 3 days. I set this to 1 hour because I really wanted us to have some data to look at in the system for our session today. So that's just an example of the possible SLAs. So if I come over to the dashboard here, the dashboard is going to show me pending items, items that have not been completed yet. Because I've set this to an hour, these are all overdue, unfortunately. So these poor people that um, that have these overdue tasks. But you'll see perhaps that some of them are unassigned. Clara is assigned to one, Sally is assigned to two, but you can also reassign this task to someone if, especially if you know that there's someone who is maybe overburdened with too many of these and you'd like to pass it over to somebody else. So as a manager, you can use this view to kind of keep an eye on where things are at in terms of which step things are at, and you can reassign tasks based on whomever might be assigned or if it's unassigned in general. So that's one option. And then the performance tab shows you the completed items. And you can see essentially all of the completed items, even untracked ones. So and this is basically if it's before you've actually set up an SLA. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of data to show you for this case, but you can review performance by per step. And hopefully in another session, I'll be able to set up some additional data elements. But yeah, you can see this one was breached by 7 hours and 24 minutes, which was probably that was one in my tasks. Oh yeah, this is definitely a nice view especially if you have the SLA set up and you have some historical data to work with. So I'm going to stop it here. And my only other topic that I wanted to cover was future sessions. And I do have a couple of ideas in mind. I know this was a really high level and we went through a lot quickly, but there are a lot of things we can talk about in terms of custom notifications, those template variables we looked at, maybe some of those Java action executors or condition evaluators. I'd like to cover the state manager for Liferay objects. So in addition to workflow, Liferay objects also introduce the state manager, which has its own definition of states. So we can definitely talk about that in a future session, and potentially integrating with external BPM systems like Camunda. So we definitely have some ideas. And if you have any ideas, then please feel free to provide feedback either via the chat or within the meetup group. So just checking, see if we have any questions. All right, I have one from Diane, and you're asking, is the Salesforce integration built into 7.4? Was that just an example that I custom built? That was an example, Diane, that I custom built because the workflow designer is so flexible and customizable. You can really add any type of logic in there that you might need. So the Salesforce, it could be any other system, maybe a CRM that needs to be updated if you're dealing with claims or fast tracking claims. And so you can really plug in any type of system there. Right. Okay. Are there any other questions? I did have some in the morning session. Maybe I can cover those here. There was one about, is there a way for the approver to edit in place or send back and on resubmit, kind of auto approve that change? I think in general, you probably don't want to auto approve it if possible. If you don't trust that content author to create the change or make the change right the first time, then there's no reason not to believe that he's going to fix it correctly. So definitely recommend continuing that workflow process. You can add permissions to make that change possible. So to view and edit those assets within the review step. So in that case, you'd probably basically approve it after you've made the change if you wanted to make the change yourself. So that would be one option to do it. And then someone else asked if you can assign a workflow to a specific folder for a specific structure to apply only to specific users' roles. So there is a way to apply it to folders. Let me see if I can open that up here. So back on the portal here. Let's see, if you go to content and data, and let's look at like, let's say documents and media. There's a folder here that has objects, assets, and if you click on the edit option, you also have the way to add this workflow restriction here within the folder level, and it would apply it to all of the folders contents for future changes. And then you can specify which workflow you want to use. And I think you can do it on web content as well. Here. So if I go to the articles folder, go to edit. Yep, same thing. And you can see it's automatically set to single approver because I had set it in the configuration tab for the workflows. So you can always change that here as well. All right. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, if not, then I want to thank you all for your time. It's been so great having you here. So great to kick off Circles of Success for 2025. And we're really looking forward to having new sessions with you. I think there's one scheduled for next month. So please stay tuned and we will keep you all posted. So thanks for joining, everybody.